professor, an author, a teacher, and the second poet laureate of Fresno, California. We're really, really thrilled to be joined by in this hour. Lee, why don't we just start off talking about, kind of your early days and how you came into to writing poetry and how that process began.
Sure. Well, before I get into that, I just wanted to say thanks for having me, Matt, and I hope you're doing all right. And I hope everybody, anybody that's watching is staying healthy and taking care. So starting at the very beginning, I was born in South Korea in late 1970, and I don't know exactly when, but I was adopted by a white family who were living in the Bay Area in California. So I was raised over there, and my mom was an artist, and I remember growing up, she was always talking about color and nuance and image and things like that. So I feel like I kind of grew up in a family of the arts. I think in high school is one of my earliest memories of starting to wonder about poetry, starting to be taken with the mystery of it. My late high school English teacher, may she rest in peace, Nancy Barr, would have us stand up and recite monologues from one of Shakespeare's plays, which terrified me because I was really scared of speaking in public. But I respected what she was doing, and even though I couldn't really understand what Shakespeare was trying to convey from word to word or line to line, I remember very distinctly loving the sound of the language and thinking about what poetry might be able to do. And then I went to Modesto Junior College and had some incredible professors there. And when I was at Stanislaus State, I didn't do an MFA actually, but I was studying political rhetoric, and that's its own kind of poetry, I think. But soon after that is when I really started to get serious about writing poetry. I had a chapbook published. I can't even remember when, but I was really starting to take it seriously. I was starting to read a lot of poetry across genres and across all kinds of experiences. I met some writers who I really respected, who were doing it in ways that I wanted to be doing it. One of the first I remember was the fiction writer Daniel Chacon, who is now in Texas, but at the time he was teaching in Modesto, and his first collection of stories had just come out called Chicano Chicanery. And so I would pick Dan's brain or just, listen to him talking about writing and the craft and the meaning of working on one's writing. And so in 1997, I moved to Fresno, where I took a job at Fresno City College, where I feel very lucky to teach. It's been a great career. This is my 25th year teaching. Taught a couple years part-time, but Fresno City College really opened up a world for me. Daniel introduced me to his closest friend, who I became friends with, the late, great Andres Montoya, who was probably my first real poetry mentor. We became friends, and Andres's influence on me was profound in many ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of the beginning of it, I guess.
Yeah. So this is being put together for collection. It'll be seen by a wide array of people. Not everyone is familiar with the ins and outs of poetry world. So can you tell the audience just how who Andres Montoya was and how large his kind of shadow looms?
Yeah. Oh, I thank you for asking, Matt. I mean, I could talk for a while on that. So please, tell me if I go on too long. So Andres Montoya was a poet from Fresno. He died when he was around 30. from leukemia. And his first book is called The Ice Worker Sings and Other Poems. And that won an American Book Award posthumously. I had seen the galleys. We used to sit down at a coffee shop here in Fresno, and he was really excited about it. He knew it was coming out, but he passed away before it was published. He was a powerful figure. Andres was larger than life. Anybody who knew him would tell you. Physically, he was imposing. I rarely, and still to this day, have met many poets with the convictions that he had about the art of poetry, about politics, about the working class, about racism, and his faith. And so, we would sit around and talk poetry and politics a lot. So, yeah, his first book is The Ice Worker Sings and Other Poems, and largely through Daniel's help and Andres's family, the book prize was established. So, if your listeners aren't aware, the Andres Montoya Poetry Prize was established by Letras Latinas and the University of Notre Dame, who that is curated by Francisco Aragon, and they give a poetry prize every 2 years. And so that legacy sort of lives on through that prize. Andres's brother is the great artist and writer Maceo Montoya, his uncle, Jose, and his father Malaquias Montoya. So this the family of the Montoyas, I think, is runs far and wide as far as the writing and the arts community. So Andres was a good friend. I miss him. I think of him honestly almost every time I read. I think about Andres. He was very blunt with me, which I liked. He would call out the BS on your poetry. He would, because he cared about you and he cared about the poetry. So, I had the honor of blurbing Andres's second posthumous book. It's called A Jury of Trees, and that was maybe a year or two ago. And that's a little bit about Andres.
Yeah. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about Daniel Chacon?
Sure. What can I say about Dan? I've known Dan for maybe 25 years. I met him in Modesto, but Dan is currently a professor. He might be the chair, actually, of the MFA program at UTEP, University of Texas, El Paso, which is a great program, by the way. Tim Hernandez is there, Sasha Pimentel, and others. But Dan is a story writer and a novelist. I don't know how many books now, maybe 6 or 7. His latest is a collection of stories called Kafka and a Skirt, and widely traveled, well-read, just a good friend. And he also, I think they're still doing this poetry radio program on the NPR affiliate there in El Paso, and I think he co-hosts that with Tim Hernandez. So Dan is another sort of early formative literary sort of figure in my life. And even though he's not here anymore, Fresno writers definitely know and remember Dan.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of starting to take writing seriously in Modesto. Were there venues or places that you would go share your poetry at the time there in Modesto that you recall?
For me, that was a little early still when I was living in Modesto. I hadn't really started reading yet anywhere. Yeah. I would go to readings here and there. A couple at the college. I saw Isabel Allende at Stanislaus State where I went, and that was a great thrill. But as far as me going out and reading, I hadn't really started doing that until I moved to Fresno. Yeah.
So much of what the project is attempting to do is capture some oral histories about presses, venues, coffee shops even. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the venues of the time that you frequented in the city of Fresno?
Yeah. Well, there was this coffee shop, The Review, that's where Andres and I would talk. And now they have this great back room where there've been a lot of readings. Brian Medina runs this poetry spoken word series called Inner Ear, and I believe it's, God, I don't know how many years, maybe 15 or something, maybe more years, every month doing readings down at Bitwise Stadium now, but they've done it at different venues, coffee shops. Of course, Fresno City College, we have some. Fresno State always has great readings going on. One of the things I always am encouraged by is when Fresno has readings in the community. When I first moved here, and I still feel this way a little bit, is that it's a little institutional. And that might be natural, and it's a good thing that the universities are bringing in writers. But I think for a lot of people, they're a little bit intimidating to go to this university, pay for parking, and everybody's dressed a certain way. So I always like when I see readings at the public libraries or at coffee shops or bars or stuff like that. But those are some of the early venues. I remember Andres's, he had a memorial reading at the old Barnes and Noble upstairs. It's not there anymore, but so yeah, there are different places around town.
Yeah. So okay, so we covered the, your beginnings. You're going to educate. You get into education. You get you're writing at Fresno. You get the job at Fresno. Tell us, like, what was the process from beginning to work there at Fresno City to the point where now you were named the poet laureate of Fresno. How did that come about?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. When I was hired in '97, I think I had a chapbook published, but my first book didn't come out until 2007. And so, I was writing poems for a while before I had a book come out. And my second book came out in 2012. So when I was named Poet Laureate, it was 2015. And I was the second one. James Tyner was the first. And we have 2-year terms here in Fresno. So that's a good question, Matt. I don't exactly know how it came to be. I mean, we have nominations here. I think some counties or cities self-nominate. Fresno, you have to be nominated. I was actually nominated the first go-around, but I declined it. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, and I wasn't sure I was, for a number of reasons, ready for that. But yeah, by 2015, I was nominated, and then there's a committee of people from different schools and art organizations and community members, and then they vote, and then it goes to the mayor, and then the mayor has a ceremony at the city hall, which was pretty cool, actually. And so it was unexpected, but it was definitely an honor. It was a real honor to do that.
Yeah. So your first book comes out in 2007. So tell us what was that like when you sent in your manuscript? What was the process like? Who published you? Yeah.
So it's kind of similar to a lot of first book poets. You're writing and you're writing and you're writing, and I realized that I had enough maybe for a book manuscript, and I had the manuscript. It's called This Many Miles from Desire, and I was doing a lot of traveling in the years up to that. I was in Latin America and Asia extensively, and so a lot of those poems were about identity, travel, and my sort of my questions around my adoption, being born in South Korea or born in Korea. So I sent it out to maybe 10 presses, I think, and I got some rejections. And then it was actually, I got an email saying that it was going to be picked up and they were going to send me a contract by a really great press that I admired. And then it kind of just fell off the radar, and hadn't heard from them, and wrote them back and still didn't hear from them. And then I found out later that they were really going through some financial difficulties. A couple of their editors were going through big life changes. So I went with the press that published it, and I've been really happy with them. When the book came out, didn't really know what to expect. I've heard other poets say there's nothing like a first book, and I know you know what it's like traveling and reading and stuff, but I was all over, and it was a little exhausting, but in a great way. Yeah.
So so it's, I kind of, one of the things we want to do is kind of highlight some presses. So I think it's WordTech Press. Is that the right? Okay. So what has it been like working with this press? Because I see that you consistently have worked with them. What's
I've enjoyed it. I like that they're very responsive. They give me a lot of freedom with covers and things like that. There are some things I might like somewhat differently, but I don't know if I want to get into those too much publicly. But it's been pretty good. I think if I write another one, I hope to write another book. I'd probably look at some other options, but they've been really good to me. They've been supportive and good to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of us, like the idea of having a press that is responsive and not controlling, that shouldn't be so rare, but it seems like it is sometimes.
Yeah. Your recent one, has it been like that? Have you had a good experience?
Flowersong has been really great. Flowersong books has been really great to me. They've allowed me all kinds of artistic freedom, and I'm not like a New York Times bestseller or anything like that, but I've sold a number of copies, and they've been able to keep up with it. So there hasn't been any issues with like getting books on time or getting, when I need books, I can get them. It's not like my last experience where they couldn't keep up with the amount of books I was selling. So. And it wasn't like, and again, it wasn't like I was selling like tens of thousands of copies or anything. It was like, this is not that many. Come on, send me. So I'm having a really good experience with Flowersong, and they're getting my name out there and they're doing good stuff. So and they're doing good by everyone else too. I mean, it's not just, I'm not like the star pupil or something like that, and they're neglecting everybody. They're doing good for everybody. For instance, something came out recently. The 30 best poets, the 30 best Latinx, etc., something from someone at NYU, and 5 of the books selected were Flowersong.
That's great.
It speaks not just to the talent of individual artists, but like the press itself is doing a good job.
Yeah. That stuff goes a long way.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's been like that for you.
What's that?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, sorry. I'm just saying it goes a long way. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So, okay, so I want to get into some of the other work you do. Can you tell us a little bit about the adoption museum? Am I getting that right?
Yeah. So that it's called the Adoption Museum Project, and we're actually on sort of an indefinite hiatus now. But we were going for about 6 or 7 years, I think. But it was started by Laura Callan, who is a domestic adoptee from the Bay Area here in California, and she's really an incredible visionary woman. And the Adoption Museum Project was sort of designed to honor the whole story. So with adoption, you're talking about adoptive parents, adopted people or adoptees, social workers, the systems that are around the adoption, media images, policy changes, things like that. And so we had a couple of great exhibits. We did an exhibit at the Presidio in San Francisco for Operation Baby Lift in 1975 with the Vietnamese adoptees, and we did work with first mothers and birth mothers, and it was a great organization. Just last year, I think we set it down for a moment. Laura's shifting gears a bit, but that's a world that I feel really proud to be a part of. Growing up, I never would have thought I'd be writing about adoption, much less working in policy or things like that. I shouldn't say working in policy. I'm supportive of certain political efforts, but I'm not really working in policy. But yeah, it's been one of the blessings of my life, being part of that community and speaking to other adoptees and things like that. I think the poetry opened up some of those doors, and just met some incredible people.
I'm very interested in how poetry exactly opened those doors, because I know I understand why the topic, you're so passionate about the topic, but how exactly did you connect to these people who were involved in doing the more kind of organizational type of
Yeah, that's a good question. And it still happens, I think, honestly. But when my first book came out, I didn't realize how many different groups of people or individuals or institutions could connect to a writer based on what they were writing about. So maybe that shouldn't surprise me, but it did. I had never gone through it. So one example I can think of with the adoption community was when my first book came out, I'd only met maybe one or two Korean adoptees in my entire life. And when the book came out, people hear about it. They write to you. I was getting letters and emails from all over. And this is also because there weren't a lot of Korean adoptee poets at that time who were published to some degree anyway. Jane Jong Trenka had a really well-known memoir. But when my book came out in the same year, there were two others that were really influential called Skirt Full of Black by Sun Young Shin and Paper Pavilion by Jennifer Kwan Dobbs. And they're adopted Korean as well. So all of a sudden I was meeting these other people. But I was invited, one of the events I remember being invited to was in Honolulu. I hope I'm not getting too far into the weeds on this story, but
this show's all about the weeds. I might even
good.
Name the show The Weeds.
Thank you. So in Honolulu, there was this organization that was centered around bone marrow donation. Okay. And I had donated blood before a couple times, but I'd never donated bone marrow. And I don't know if you might be aware of this, but bone marrow has to be DNA and relative sort of donations. Blood you can donate to anybody. You don't have to be related to them. Right. But I found out through this organization that Asian Americans don't donate bone marrow very much. And what that means is when an Asian American needs bone marrow to save his or her or their life, it's very difficult to find a match often. And so I had written a poem in my first book for a Korean adoptee who died needing a bone marrow donation. She was 25. Her name was Julia, and she lived in New York. And she died without getting a match. And so they asked me to come read and speak at this event for Asian American bone marrow donation, health, wellness, awareness, and stuff like that. So, there are a lot of literary things specifically and poetry audiences, but I think poetry extends and sort of transcends a lot of those academic or different kinds of boundaries. That's been my experience anyway.
Did you write an original piece encouraging people to donate bone marrow?
I didn't. No, the poem I read was, it's called Light. It's in my first book, and it's about that adoptee who died named Julia. A little side note that makes it more, to fill out the story a little bit. I'd never met her, but I got this email from a friend of hers just out of the blue. saying that she was a friend of this person named Julia, and her friend Julia was dying. She was in the hospital, and she had spent about a year trying to save her life. And the doctors there had given her sort of last words. They said you should prepare. And her friend told me in this email that she was reading poems from my first book to Julia, and she couldn't speak at this time, but she was starting to cry a little bit. And then her friend asked her if she wanted to read another poem, and Julia nodded yes. And then she read her a couple more of the poems, and then she passed away that night. And so that's the kind of stuff where I think, for me at least, where some of the poetry comes from is that stuff that we don't talk about a lot, or the stuff that really bothers you late at night, or things like that. So that was a little bit about Julia in the bone marrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that poem's found in your first collected work?
I think I said first, it's actually in Gardening Secrets of the Dead. It's in my second book. I'll send you a copy of it.
Yeah, we'll tell our audience a little bit about your second collection, Gardening and the Secrets of the Dead.
Gardening Secrets of the Dead came out in 2012, and that book was a little bit more political. I had gone through a pretty major relationship change. I'd become a father. Obama had become president. And I was also in a place where I felt a lot more self-assured as a poet. And so there are just a lot more poems that are about, still about culture and identity, but a little bit more assertive, I think. And it had some adoption poems in it as well. I had done a birth family search by then in 2008. And so a little bit of the book has some of those poems in it too. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned travel. Was that travel to do with your studies in poetics, or was that to do with the adoption studies you were doing, or?
A little bit. I was in South Korea in 2008 on sabbatical, so I was doing some adoption birth search stuff, but mostly it was just 2 or 3 months at a time over the summers. I would turn in my grades and I would be in Bolivia, or I would be in Cambodia. So mostly, honestly, Matt, it was backpacking. I was just traveling as cheaply and as purely, I thought, as I could. Everything was local travel. I was eating everything local. Just really some great experiences that I had. Yeah.
Yeah. So we live in a country where people don't travel much. Can you talk about, like, the importance of travel and how that kind of shapes your thinking, but also could, like, potentially reshape the thinking of most people and why they should do it? I mean, obviously, I'm not shaming anybody.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I've thought about that. Or I've been asked, what does travel do? And I wish I had a clean, quick, easy answer. I don't really know, but you asked about this country. I think here, so many people have this idea, whether you call it exceptionalism, or I hear people say, oh, it's so diverse geographically or ethnically or with cuisine. Why would I want to travel anywhere? And I think even with that, as great and expansive and troublesome as this country is, to say that to negate the value of any other country is just mind-boggling to me. But it's sort of reinforced in our curriculum. It's reinforced in our politics, our media, the World Series, which is only the U.S. and 1 or 2 teams from Canada. So, we have this idea that things outside this country are either not of value, dangerous, or not worth exploring. And yeah, I don't know. You know, I think I've heard a couple of writers say they realize how similar people are through all of their unique differences, linguistic or whatever. I think that has helped me to see, even across government systems or whatever it might be, uh, you know, there are some human qualities I think that transcend any border. Um, you know, I would like to think I had a certain amount of appreciation and respect for people of all walks of life before I started traveling, but it
Yeah,
certainly has deepened it. I don't think you have to travel to have a respect for people, but it can broaden that for sure.
yeah,
Um, and you know, I was doing it on the cheap, and I think also this could sound well. I don't have $1,000 for a plane ticket. I'm glad you got to go wherever. And all I would say to that is that there's a lot of territory, even in the U.S., to travel if a person um, is in that situation. But also, and I don't want to get into like pseudo travel advice because I'm not, you know, that well versed. But the biggest thing is the airline ticket, because a lot of countries, once you get there, you're paying a quarter or a half of what you'd be paying to live daily here.
yeah,
So it's much more affordable than people think.
yeah. Um,
Um,
yeah. So I mean, it seems to me that it's those odd little details that tend to humanize people or different people. I mean, like the idea that we're all human beings and it's a small world after all type thing that like just makes you a decent person, right? But when you're there in somewhere else, when you're there in another country, when you're there with a group of people that just do things a little differently than you do, and you see the little details and nuances of you know the culture or just the way people live, right?
yeah,
That it's like a picture's through 1,000 words or something like that. It's just
yeah.
different. It's just different.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these are memories are just coming to me now. I remember being in Peru once, and this guy asked me, "Are you PBJ?" And I remember thinking, "PBJ, what?" And he goes, I said, you know, I knew a little bit of Spanish, and I asked him, you know, could you repeat that? He said, "Are you PBJ?" I was like, "I'm sorry, I don't know what that means." And he said, "Peruvian-born Japanese." Which, if you've been to Peru, or maybe you know people know without going, they have a lot of Japanese people there. And you know, you may have heard the acronym ABC, American Born Chinese. So just things like that. Or, you know, I remember being also upper more in Cusco, and there was this event. This was back when George Bush II or whatever was president, and they were having really an anti-U.S., anti-W sort of rally. And so to see that, you know, we know how America is viewed outside this country in many ways, in many places. And so to see it there was memorable. You know, the poets, the food, it's just, there's a lot to see, you know?
Yeah. Can you tell us a little about Scar and Flower?
Sure. Scar and Flower came out just last year, early 2019, and it's my third book. And I think I was writing that book for about 4 years, and it's a lot to do with American gun violence and how we cope with it or how we navigate those traumas in this country. In 2014, Michael Brown was killed. Eric Garner was choked. And that officer, Daniel Pantaleo, is still working as a police officer. Um, Around those years also was the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting, the Sandy Hook shooting, where there were 20 first graders killed, which is still um, extremely disturbing, I think, to anybody, to me at least. So yeah, I was writing a lot of poems about gun violence. You know, I had a friend whose brother committed suicide by putting a gun in his mouth in a park. Um, a Korean adoptee who was deported. One of the things some people don't know about our sort of nightmarish immigration policies is that there are some transnational adoptees who are being deported. So I wrote a poem in that book about Philip Clay, who was deported and then committed suicide by jumping off the 14th story of a building in Seoul. So the poems are a little bit heavy in the first half of the book, and then the second half is a little bit different. You know, I'm talking about family, my daughter, um, things like that, just for some levity, because I think we need levity, we need humor, we need to be able to balance that stuff.
Yeah. Seems like so many of your works are not they're not just like this collection of works. They're like kind of meditations on theme, right? So is there a kind of is there anything you're putting together in this moment right now, or are there ideas scrambling around your mind about how to describe what we're experiencing now in this COVID crisis?
I can't say that I have a lot of writing projects or something substantial that I'm working on with regard to the pandemic. I did publish one poem. It's called "The Birds Outside My Window Sing During a Pandemic," and one of the poets laureate from the East Bay asked me to write something, so somehow I was able to do that. But that one's online, and I'm writing 7 to 9 lines right now for a group poem that's being written, and then it'll be translated into 4 languages. So I'm excited about that. There's poets, I think maybe 5 from the U.S. and then from around the world, and it'll be translated into Turkish, Farsi, Italian, and Spanish. But you know, and actually, Matt, that's a good question, or it makes me think. I think this is the first time I've realized this, but one of the things I'm thinking about now is probably one of the main themes that I'm always working with or thinking about, and that is just how people survive.
Mm.
You know, how we, you know, our beginnings, our experiences, the world, trauma, and it's all coming down now, I think.
Yeah.
Uh,
So before the hour, before we began talking, we kind of like we went over some stuff, and you mentioned that one of the topics I want to hit was about some of the kind of the racist attacks right now that are happening against Asian Americans, the Asian American community broadly. Would you like to speak to that?
yeah. I mean, I think my sense is that most people of color could talk about a number of experiences on a daily or a regular basis where racism is at play, overtly or subtly. It's certainly embedded in any kind of institution, Hollywood or the literary establishment or education and stuff like that. But you know what you hear on the streets or just subtle sorts of gestures or more blatant like name calling or even physical violence. I guess that's on the rise again, and I think that might be in part due to the president's encouragement, but it's always been there, of course. I mean, I don't know if this will make sense, but I think a lot of it has to do with mockery and degradation that we learn to think is okay or even partake in through media and jokes. And so that it could be dismissed, right? Oh, you should just lighten up, or come on, man, I make fun of everybody. Well, that just means you're racist to everybody,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't negate, right? That's just what we call gaslighting. So, you know, I think race can be done well. I'm not saying you can't make jokes about race, but mockery is different. Degradation is different. And so when people, and it's maybe mostly white, but I'm talking about people from any background who partake in that stuff. It just contributes to it. So you're lessening the value of the person, the group, so that when it becomes time to place blame for a pandemic, it's already in motion and it's easier to accept. I think of it the same way that why nobody's in, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but why so few people are really up in arms or taking serious note about the people largely from Honduras and Mexico and a couple other countries in cages and whatnot. Because that groundwork has already been laid in the mockery and degradation of brown people from that part of the world,
Yeah.
right? They are taking your jobs. It's sort of an economic fear that's established, and that happens with Asians. The economic fear, the Chinese buying up companies, or Mexicans taking people's jobs. I think it's all sort of BS and a narrative to lay the groundwork for the bigger machinery that can roll through for even more damage.
Yeah.
But we feel it on like a day-to-day individual level where it's just very hurtful. And for me, growing up in a white family, it never made sense to me because my family was white. I didn't speak Korean. I didn't have an accent. I knew all the white cultural references my friends did. So the racism I would get as a kid really confused me, and I never really knew how to handle it. Now I have to say I enjoy talking about race or teaching about race dynamics and things like that because it's not something I shy away from now, whether it's at a grocery store or anywhere else in a department meeting.
Yeah. I think, yeah, definitely agree with, everything you're saying. I mean, it's a daily thing, but there are upticks. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
for me, what I experienced is when Donald Trump, began his 2015, he comes down the escalator, Mexico sending drug dealers and rapists. Things got really, really bad for like I want to say like a 2-year period for me personally.
Yeah.
Because I'm very strident and very outspoken, but I was getting a lot of death threats around that time.
Mm.
And like because just I'm very strident.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'll say what I'll say. And so in that time period I was getting a lot of death threats. But I don't get death threats anymore, because now it's like calmed down, it's gone in a different direction, it kind of petered out a little bit.
Yeah.
Racism against Mexicans still exists, but it's not like every day like this, right? And so I feel like right now with the COVID crisis, it seems like Asian Americans being shut up by those ideas always exist. That yellow peril and the Chinese thread and that the other, but it seems like right now, those things, someone's throwing gasoline on what's an eternal flame, but it's like they're throwing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we were talking about this earlier a little bit, where I think it's just always kind of that way, and I hope people can keep their eyes on the prize a bit, and by that I just mean elections and voting, and at the very least not dividing ourselves as we navigate all this stuff. I'm thinking about, we were talking about Juan Felipe Herrera a little bit earlier, and he's here in Fresno, and I think he's as soulful and as loving a human can be. And I think some people mistake any poet for being apolitical if they're loving. He's as political as it gets, and has been before many of us were even born. And so I think as things come together, as things sort of unify to the extent possible, we can move things forward a bit. But all the dog whistle rapists and criminals and threats and all this stuff is just it's just nonsense. And I think we can do better.
Yeah. Definitely. Do you? I know I'm putting you on the spot because we didn't talk about this earlier, but do you have any collections of your poetry?
Do I have what?
Do you have any of the collections of your poetry at hand, like that you can?
I do. I don't have them like at the table, but I could walk right over there and get one. Why?
Could you share a poem with us? Is that possible?
Yeah. Let me just give me 1 second.
All right. Cool.
Okay.
All right, for the audience who's tuning in, I just put Lee Herrick on the spot and asked him to share a poem with us. Um, those are some beautiful portraits in the back. I'm gonna ask him about those when he gets back. I have to be honest with you. I was talking about you, Lee, while you were gone.
Oh. What were you saying? Or do I want to know?
I was saying that you got some beautiful portraits in the back, and I'm going to ask you about them.
Oh.
And also, it was my fault for putting you on the spot, and we didn't.
No, you know, I should have been. Yeah, I thought maybe I should have one just in case. Okay, so I'll read one from my new book, Scar and Flower. I'm going to do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Wait, where is it? Okay.
We've got
it. So I think I'll read this one. It's sort of about birth mothers, and it's sort of a love poem of sorts for my birth mother, or really any mother who has placed a child for adoption. I haven't met my birth parents, so yeah, I'll just read this, okay? It's called, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. I'm just plugging my computer so guy.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, it's called How Music Stays in the Body. Your body is a song called Birth or First Mother, a miracle that gave birth to another exquisite song. One song raises 3 boys with a white husband. One song fought an American war overseas. One song leapt from 14 stories high and like a dead bird shattered into the clouds. Most forgot the lyrics to their own bodies or decided to paint abstracts of mountains or moons in the shape of your face. I've been told mothers don't forget the body. I can't remember your face, the shape or story, or how you held me the day I was born. So I wrote 1,000 poems to survive. I want to sing with you in an open field, a simple room, or a quiet bar. I want to hear your opinions about angels. Truth is, angels drink too. Soju spilled on the halo, white wings sticky with gin, as if any mother could forget the music that left her. You should hear how loudly I sing now. I've become a ballad of wild dreams and coping mechanisms. I can breathe now through any fire. I imagine I got this from him or you, my earthly inheritance, your arms, your sigh, your heavy song. I know all the lyrics. I know all the blood. I know why angels howl into the moonlight.
Yeah. A Ballad of Wild Dreams. That's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you now about you know, we've covered you as a professor, we covered you as we covered you as a poet, and I want to talk to you about as you as a professor. Like, so what is it that you want to, when someone attends your class? Like, what is it that you think in your mind? Like, what are you going to offer them? What are you going to teach them? What's the end goal? How should they leave changed?
It's a good question. Well, I'm going to talk about that through the lens of being a professor at Fresno City College, which I think that answer would be different because I teach also in an MFA program. But at Fresno City College, you know, it's 25,000 students. It's open entry, very diverse. What were you asking? What's the main thing I want them to get, or what?
What do you want them to get that experience, and how should they leave changed as a writer? I mean, like, obviously individual people have their individual whatever their trajectory, but what are you trying to assist them in? What are you trying to like view, get across?
You know, when I'm teaching, one of the things I tell them, and I'm telling all of them this, is that I want good things for them. I'm concerned for their well-being, physically, emotionally, academically. that's not to say I'm going to pretend to be their counselor or their best friend, but I want them to understand, at least from my point of view, that their education can transform their lives in more ways that they can possibly fathom. And they are there, whether they know it or not, they're there for something of that sort. They're there for something. It might be a job or a certificate or going to some university, but they have a certain amount of hunger as well. So I'm meeting them there. I'm not forcing them, but I want them to know that I take it seriously. I want them to know that it's a place of errors, to learn is to err, and to then try to do the best one can to grow. And so in the writing, of course, obviously I want them to be a better writer on the page. This is going to sound really dorky, but I can't even believe I'm going to say this. But the comma is political. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How a person writes, a job or somewhere has 100 letters, and all they see of a person is in writing. I want them to get that job because of a million other factors, including how they are writing. That includes how they're speaking, presenting themselves, knowing the context. So I want them, I also try to give them some self-esteem through their successes. I could tell them all day that I believe in them, and I think that hopefully will help. But when they start to notice, oh, I did actually turn in essay 1, when that might have been a huge obstacle for the person. So the classroom to me is a very political place in that sense, not talking about partisanship or voting per se, but just the politics of the person. So I want them to maybe see how that stuff relates to their lives, their relationships, the people around them, their futures, and just to do the best they can. I want them to care about those things. And I tell you, and I think anybody who's taught for a long time could probably tell some stories like this. And I probably should not talk out of school, so I'll keep this extremely general. But, students coming out of prison or trying to get a life together, leaving an abusive situation, homeless, or, I've had students who are on their way to whatever top flight university too, but I love it. The classroom is an exhilarating place. Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about the comma is political. It's a socioeconomic deal with the way you write, the way you speak. But I kind of feel like you can experiment with where you put these things and change meaning, but whatever you do has to look intentional.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Absolutely. And you're there to where the old adage, the rules so you can break them. But there's another layer to that too, and that is, I think there are some people who will discount someone just because of an accent or just because of a misplaced comma, and will negate 99 other things of the 100 that the person's doing well. So I say that with a little bit tongue-in-cheek because there's that part of it, but it's still as far as I've seen it, that stuff still really comes to bear, the politics of language and things like that.
So I'm kind of curious as to your opinion about the current president of the United States and his choice of because to me he has some bizarre adjective choices. I mean, we talked about like using the commas political. He chooses odd adjectives, and his capitalization is also kind of bizarre. Like, I never know why certain words are capitalized and why they're not, and why the adjective, like he says, he's like a very stable genius. He's under he has a situation under tremendous control. I've never heard these combinations of words before.
What do
you think?
Honestly, and this might sound strange coming from an English professor, but I don't care too much about his grammar or his punctuation and stuff. I mean, we could all, poke some fun at him, I guess. But the stable genius and the tremendous. I think he sort of, the air he breathes, he is hyperbole. I mean, he I think he's lived a life of extremes, whether it's extreme debt and poverty, or by most measure, a lot of wealth. So I don't think he has, and he also doesn't have the political experience, of years on the campaign trail and debates to provide a measured political, smooth
Adjective.
sounding statement or adjective. Yeah, I think it's extremely painful in a lot of ways, but uh, I'm just very hopeful for the next election. Let's just put it like that.
There's probably more pressing issues than his adjective. But I'm just curious, when I'm just since you mentioned the comma, this is something I always like. There's many other things to be said, but I mean, like I always notice, like his.
Well, yeah, on that,
yeah,
on that, that might just be one more thing where um, he has somehow played the system so that is one more thing that doesn't apply to him. Do you remember, if you remember Dan Quayle, who was vice president under the first Bush, he got railed and practically became the joke of the country for misspelling potato.
he misspelled Taylor. He was like the
Right?
joke, political joke
Right.
of the '90s.
Right.
You are not JFK or something like that, right?
Exactly. That was Lloyd Benston in the debate. And so now we've got this guy. So it's so sad. It's tough to deal with.
What a situation. Tell us about the anthology that's coming out this year.
Oh, thank you for asking. Actually, I do happen to have a copy of that one right here. And I'm going to do this dorky thing again. There it is. So, The World I Leave You, extremely happy and proud about this one. Was about 3 years of work, and I co-edited this with a fantastic poet back on the East Coast. Her name is Leah Silvius, and it's called The World I Leave You, Asian American Poets on Faith and Spirit. The cover art is really nice. It's by the Southern California poet and artist Kenji Liu. So yeah, this actually has been available for pre-order for a few months, but the official publication date is tomorrow. So if anybody's interested, check it out. It's really a wonderful anthology. 61 poets, I think. Mm-hmm. Oh, I think I lost your audio.
I muted myself because I had an incoming call there. We're going to drop all the links below, Lee. I really thank you for joining us. This has really been a really, really great, informative talk. So, yeah, we're going to drop all your links below, and hopefully we'll be talking soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Matt. Keep up the great work you're doing. Appreciate you having me.
All right.